The ice coating my windows was thicker than my patience when I opened the certified letter from the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, informing me that I was being fined $1,500 for operating an unauthorized generator during last week's blackout. I stood there in my living room, still shivering from the memory of those 48 hours when the rest of my street sat in frozen darkness while my house glowed with warmth and light. My name is Marcus Vaughn, and I never thought keeping my family alive would be considered a violation of community standards. The winter storm had hit Pennsylvania's suburban Philadelphia area harder than anyone predicted. Meteorologists called it a 100-year event, with temperatures plummeting to -12 degrees and ice accumulating on power lines, until they snapped like guitar strings. I had installed that backup generator 3 years ago after my wife Sarah nearly died from hypothermia during a previous winter outage. She has a medical condition that makes temperature regulation difficult, and our doctor had explicitly recommended we maintain climate control at all times. The generator cost me $8,000, but what price could I put on my wife's life? I read through the violation notice again, my hands trembling with anger rather than cold. The letter was signed by Patricia Hollingsworth, the president of our HOA board and the most insufferable busybody I had ever encountered in my 42 years of existence. Patricia was the kind of middle-aged woman who measured her self-worth by how many people she could control, and she wielded the HOA rules like a medieval executioner wielded an axe. The notice cited Section 7.3 of the Community Covenants, which apparently prohibited the installation or operation of any external mechanical equipment without prior board approval. I had never seen this rule before, and I had read through those covenants pretty thoroughly when we purchased our home 5 years ago. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Jim Henderson. "Did you get one too? They fined me for running my generator. This is insane." I called Jim immediately. He answered on the first ring, sounding as furious as I felt. "Marcus, I do not understand this. My mother was staying with us during the storm. She is 86 years old and on oxygen. What was I supposed to do, let her freeze to death in the dark?" Jim's voice cracked with emotion. "How much did they fine you?" I asked. $1,500, same as you, I am guessing." "Yeah, when did you get your notice?" "Today. Certified mail. Patricia must have sent them all out at once." I looked out my front window and saw 3 other neighbors standing in their driveways, holding similar envelopes and gesturing angrily. This was not just about me and Jim. Patricia had apparently decided to wage war against everyone who had dared to prioritize their family's safety over some obscure HOA regulation. "We need to fight this," I said. "This is completely unreasonable." "I am with you. Let me make some calls. We should organize a meeting." Over the next 2 hours, my phone did not stop ringing. It turned out that Patricia had sent violation notices to 17 homeowners, all of whom had operated generators during the storm. The total fines amounted to over $25,000. Several of the affected families had young children. One had an elderly parent with dementia. Another had a home medical setup for their disabled son. Every single person had a legitimate reason for needing backup power, and every single person was livid. By 6 o'clock that evening, 12 of us had gathered in my living room. The mood was tense but focused. We needed a strategy, and we needed it fast. The violation notices gave us 14 days to either pay the fine or request a hearing before the HOA board. After that, the HOA could place liens on our properties. Jim Henderson suggested we pool resources and hire an attorney. Linda Martinez, who lived 3 houses down, mentioned that her sister was a real estate lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. George Patterson, a retired professor who had lived in Meadowbrook Heights for 20 years, reminded us that the HOA covenants required a 2/3 majority vote for any rule that imposed financial penalties over $500. He could not remember any community meeting where such a vote had taken place. "I have every newsletter and meeting notice from the past decade," George said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "I never saw anything about generators being prohibited. This might be Patricia making up rules as she goes." "Can she do that?" Linda asked. "No," George replied. "The board can enforce existing covenants, but they cannot create new financial penalties without community approval. If she is applying a rule that was never properly ratified, these fines are invalid." This was the opening we needed. I volunteered to draft a formal response to the violation notices, requesting an emergency hearing and challenging the validity of the generator prohibition. Everyone agreed to sign it. We also decided to hire Linda's sister to review the HOA documents and advise us on our legal options. The next morning, I took a personal day from my job as a software engineer and spent 6 hours at the county clerk's office, pulling records related to Meadowbrook Heights HOA. I found the original covenants from when the development was established in 1998, along with several amendments that had been voted on and approved over the years. Nowhere in any of these documents did I find Section 7.3 or any mention of generators. The only reference to external equipment was a vague clause about satellite dishes needing approval, and even that had been superseded by federal telecommunications law. I made copies of everything and drove straight to Linda's sister's office. Alina Delgado was sharp, professional, and immediately interested in our case. "This is pretty egregious," Alina said after reviewing the documents. "Your HOA president appears to have cited a non-existent rule. That is fraud, essentially. She is collecting money under false pretenses. Can we sue?" I asked. "You can, but let me try something else first. I am going to send a letter to the board on behalf of all 17 homeowners, notifying them that they are in violation of Pennsylvania HOA law and demanding immediate rescission of all fines. I will also request a full audit of the HOA's finances. If Patricia has been this sloppy with rule enforcement, I wonder what else she might be doing wrong. How long will this take? I will have the letter out today. They will have 10 business days to respond. In the meantime, do not pay anything and do not sign anything they send you." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. We had a plan and we had a professional fighting for us, but I also felt a growing sense of dread. Patricia Hollingsworth did not strike me as the type of person who would back down gracefully. This was going to get ugly. That evening, Sarah and I were eating dinner when our doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patricia herself standing on my porch, clutching a leather portfolio and wearing an expression that could curdle milk. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "Patricia, what can I do for you? You can start by not rallying the neighborhood against the board. I heard about your little meeting last night. We are exercising our rights as homeowners. Your fine is unjust and possibly illegal." Her face flushed red. "Illegal? How dare you? I have served this community for 8 years. Everything I do is for the good of property values and neighborhood standards. Then show me where in the covenants it says we cannot operate generators during emergencies." Section 7.3 clearly states, "There is no Section 7.3. I have pulled every covenant and amendment filed with the county." That section does not exist. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For a moment, I thought she might actually admit her mistake. Instead, She drew herself up to her full height and glared at me. The board has the authority to interpret existing rules as we see fit. Your generator was a nuisance and a noise violation. Several residents complained. During a blackout, when everyone else was either running their own generators or had evacuated, that is convenient. Give me the names of the residents who complained. That information is confidential. Of course it is. Patricia, we have already hired an attorney. Elena Delgado, maybe you have heard of her. She specializes in taking apart fraudulent HOA boards. You are going to rescind these fines or we are going to court. Your choice. Patricia's eyes narrowed to slits. You are making a terrible mistake, Marcus. The board has significant resources. We can make your life very difficult. Is that a threat? It is a fact. Good evening. She turned on her heel and stalked back to her car, a black Mercedes SUV that probably cost more than my generator and legal fees combined. I watched her drive away, feeling both vindicated and concerned. Patricia did not seem like someone who would simply surrender. Over the next week, things escalated quickly. 3 more homeowners received additional violation notices for supposed infractions. One for having Christmas lights up past January 15th, one for parking a work van in their driveway overnight, and one for having a basketball hoop that was allegedly too close to the street. All 3 homeowners were part of our group fighting the generator fines. The pattern was obvious. Patricia was retaliating. Elena filed our formal challenge to the generator fines and included documentation of the retaliatory violations. She also submitted a request to the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office to investigate the HOA for potential fraud and harassment. Things were moving, but slowly. In the meantime, we were all living under a cloud of uncertainty. Then Jim Henderson called me at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, his voice shaking. Marcus, someone slashed my tires, all 4 of them, and they spray-painted rule breaker on my garage door. Did you call the police? They just left, filed a report. But Marcus, I know who did this. I saw Patricia's car driving past my house 3 times this evening. She was watching my place. Did you tell the police that? I mentioned it, but I do not have proof. They said unless I have video evidence or witnesses, there is not much they can do. I am installing security cameras tomorrow, I said. You should do the same. Already ordered them. The vandalism rattled everyone. If Patricia or one of her allies was willing to destroy property, what else might they do? I started parking my car in the garage instead of the driveway. Sarah began checking the locks twice before bed. The sense of community that had drawn us to Meadowbrook Heights 5 years ago had evaporated, replaced by suspicion and fear. Elena advised us to document everything. Every interaction with Patricia, every suspicious incident, every piece of correspondence from the HOA. She was building a case not just for rescinding the fines, but for removing Patricia from the board entirely. Pennsylvania law allowed homeowners to petition for the removal of board members who engaged in harassment or fraud. We needed 51% of the community to sign on. Elena thought we could get it. The emergency hearing was scheduled for February 28th, 3 weeks after the initial violation notices. The HOA bylaws required hearings to be held in a public space accessible to all residents. Patricia had booked the community clubhouse, a bland rectangular building near the neighborhood entrance that usually hosted children's birthday parties and yoga classes. On the night of the hearing, over 60 residents packed into the clubhouse. The 17 of us who had been fined sat in the front row. Elena stood beside us, professional in a navy suit, her briefcase filled with evidence. Patricia sat at a long table in the front with the other 4 board members. Kenneth Morrison, the vice president, Deborah Finch, the secretary, Raymond Cho, the treasurer, and Susan Wallace, a board member. All of them looked uncomfortable except Patricia, who sat ramrod straight with a smug expression on her face. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a prepared statement about the importance of community standards and the necessity of following rules. She spoke for 10 minutes without addressing any of the specific issues we had raised. When she finally paused, Alina stood up. "Madam President, I am Alina Delgado, legal counsel for the 17 homeowners who received generator violation notices. Before we proceed, I need to clarify several points. First, my clients have requested documentation proving the existence of Section 7.3 of the Community Covenants. You have not provided this documentation. Second, my clients have requested the names of residents who allegedly complained about generator noise. You have not provided this information. Third, my clients have submitted evidence that several of them have been subjected to retaliatory violations since challenging the original fines. The board has not addressed these concerns. Would you like to respond to any of these points now?" Patricia's face turned an impressive shade of purple. "The board is not obligated to justify its decisions to residents who refuse to accept legitimate authority. Actually, under Pennsylvania HOA law, the board absolutely is obligated to justify penalties and provide due process. Your refusal to do so constitutes a violation of your fiduciary duty. I do not need a lecture on law from someone who was not elected to this board." Alina smiled coldly. "You are correct. You need a lecture on law from a judge, which is where we will be heading if you do not rescind these fines immediately." The room erupted in applause and shouts. Several residents who were not part of our group stood up to voice support. Patricia banged a gavel repeatedly, demanding order. "This hearing is for board members to listen to appeals from the accused residents," Patricia shouted. "It is not a town hall for general complaints." "Then let us appeal," I said, standing up. "I installed my generator 3 years ago to protect my wife's health. During the storm, the temperature in our neighborhood dropped to -12 degrees. Power was out for 48 hours. My wife has a documented medical condition that requires climate control. Running that generator was not a choice. It was a necessity. You are fining me for keeping my wife alive. Explain to everyone here how that is reasonable." Patricia did not respond. Instead, Kenneth Morrison leaned forward and spoke for the first time. "Mr. Vaughn, I think there has been some misunderstanding. When Patricia brought this issue to the board, she characterized the generator usage as a noise nuisance, not a medical necessity. If you have documentation from your wife's doctor, we should consider that." "I submitted medical documentation with my written appeal 2 weeks ago," I said. "Did you not read it?" Kenneth looked at Patricia. "I did not see any medical documentation in the appeal packets you distributed." Patricia's composure cracked just slightly. "Those documents were not relevant to the noise violation." "Not relevant?" Jim Henderson jumped to his feet. "My mother was on oxygen during that storm. I submitted her medical records too." "Did you hide those as well?" Deborah Finch, the secretary, looked horrified. "Patricia, did you withhold evidence from the board?" "I used my discretion as president to determine what information was pertinent," Patricia said, but her voice had lost its confidence. Alina seized the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you are witnessing is a board president who has not only created fraudulent violations, but has actively concealed exculpatory evidence from her fellow board members. This is not a misunderstanding. This is intentional misconduct." I move that this board immediately rescind all generator fines and launch an investigation into President Hollingsworth's actions. Raymond Cho, the treasurer, raised his hand. I second that motion. Patricia slammed her gavel down. You cannot make motions without board approval. Actually, any board member can make a motion, Elena said. And it has been seconded. You need to call a vote. For a long moment, Patricia just stared at Elena with pure hatred. Then she stood up, gathered her papers, and walked out of the clubhouse without another word. The room fell silent. Kenneth Morrison cleared his throat. All right, let us vote. All in favor of rescinding the generator fines and investigating President Hollingsworth's conduct. 4 hands went up: Kenneth, Deborah, Raymond, and Susan. Motion passes unanimously, Kenneth said. The fines are rescinded effective immediately, and I think we need to call an emergency board election. The room erupted in cheers. I felt Sarah grab my hand and squeeze it tightly. We had won, at least this round, but I knew Patricia would not go quietly. Over the next 2 weeks, the full extent of Patricia's misconduct came to light. Raymond Cho, the treasurer, conducted an audit of the HOA's finances and discovered that Patricia had been diverting funds into unauthorized accounts. Over the past 3 years, approximately $48,000 had gone missing. The money had supposedly been used for legal fees and administrative costs, but there was no documentation to support these expenses. Raymond turned his findings over to the board, and Kenneth immediately contacted the police. Detective Sarah Brennan from the Lower Merion Township Police Department took the case. She was thorough and professional, interviewing board members, reviewing bank records, and collecting evidence. It turned out that Patricia had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, landscaping for her own property, membership fees at a country club, even a vacation to Florida that she had classified as a community planning conference. I learned all of this because Raymond kept me informed. He felt guilty for not catching the discrepancies earlier and wanted to make amends. He explained that Patricia had always handled the finances herself, telling the other board members that she had accounting experience and did not want to burden them with tedious bookwork. They had trusted her, and she had betrayed that trust spectacularly. On March 18th, Detective Brennan arrested Patricia Hollingsworth for theft and fraud. The arrest happened in the morning, and by noon, everyone in Meadowbrook Heights knew about it. I watched from my window as a police car pulled up to Patricia's house, and 2 officers escorted her out in handcuffs. She was still wearing her bathrobe, and her face was streaked with tears. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The local news picked up the story that evening. HOA president arrested for embezzlement ran as the lead story on the 6 o'clock broadcast. They interviewed several residents, including Jim Henderson, who described the generator fines and Patricia's retaliatory behavior. The reporter made it sound like a cautionary tale about unchecked power in suburban communities. It was. Elena advised our group to file a civil suit against Patricia to recover the costs we had incurred fighting her fraudulent fines. Legal fees, time off work, stress, and emotional distress. We were not interested in revenge, but we wanted accountability. 17 families had been harassed and financially threatened because one woman had decided that her authority was more important than people's safety and well-being. The lawsuit moved forward slowly. Patricia hired a defense attorney, but her case was weak. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Bank records, emails, testimony from 4 other board members, and the police investigation all painted a clear picture of someone who had been abusing her position for years. Her attorney tried to negotiate a settlement, but we refused. We wanted a judgment on the record. While the legal process dragged on, the HOA held emergency elections for a new board. Kenneth Morrison ran for president and won easily. He was a decent man, a high school teacher who genuinely cared about the community. His first act as president was to hire an independent management company to handle HOA finances and ensure proper oversight. His second act was to revise the community covenants to include protections for homeowners during emergencies. The new rules explicitly allowed backup generators, medical equipment, and other safety measures without board approval. Jim Henderson was elected to the board as well, along with Linda Martinez. George Patterson declined to run, saying he was too old for the drama, but he agreed to serve as an advisor. The new board was functional, transparent, and actually interested in serving the community rather than controlling it. It was a remarkable change. In late April, Patricia's criminal trial began. I attended every day, sitting in the courtroom gallery and watching as prosecutors methodically dismantled her defense. They showed how she had created fake invoices, forged signatures, and lied to her fellow board members about where money was going. They brought in forensic accountants who traced the stolen funds to Patricia's personal accounts. They presented emails in which Patricia had discussed with her husband how to hide the embezzlement. Her defense attorney argued that Patricia had been under stress and had made mistakes, but these were accounting errors rather than intentional theft. The jury did not buy it. After 3 hours of deliberation, they returned a guilty verdict on all counts: theft, fraud, and misuse of fiduciary authority. The judge sentenced Patricia to 4 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA, plus fines and court costs. It was a harsh sentence, but appropriate given the scale of her crimes and the number of people she had harmed. As the bailiff led Patricia away, she looked back at the gallery. Our eyes met for just a moment. I did not feel triumphant. I felt sad that it had come to this. The civil suit settled in June. Patricia's husband, who had been named as a co-defendant because he had benefited from the stolen money, agreed to pay $75,000 to cover our legal fees and compensate us for the stress and harassment. It was not as much as we had asked for, but Alina advised us that it was a fair settlement and pursuing a larger judgment would take years. We agreed. By July, Meadowbrook Heights had returned to something resembling normalcy. The new board was working well. The community held a summer barbecue, and people actually seemed to enjoy being neighbors again. Sarah's health remained stable, and I slept better knowing that we could use our generator whenever necessary without facing retaliation. One evening in early August, I was mowing the lawn when Kenneth Morrison walked over from across the street. He had a cold beer in each hand and offered me one. "Thought you could use this," he said. "Thanks." I killed the mower engine and wiped sweat from my forehead. "I wanted to tell you something," Kenneth said. "When I first joined the board 4 years ago, I thought Patricia was doing a great job. She was organized, efficient, and seemed to care about the neighborhood. I did not see what was really happening until you and the others challenged those generator fines. I am sorry it took me so long to pay attention. You voted to rescind the fines as soon as you knew the truth. That is what matters. Still, I should have been more vigilant. I let her have too much control because it was easier than asking questions. I think a lot of board members do that, and that is how people like Patricia get away with what they do. So what are you going to do differently? Everything. Full transparency. Monthly financial reports published to all residents. Open board meetings with community input. Term limits so no one person can dominate for too long. I want to make sure this never happens again. That sounds good, Kenneth. Really good. We stood there for a while, drinking our beers and watching the sun set behind the houses. It felt peaceful, normal, the way a neighborhood should feel. I thought about everything that had happened over the past 6 months. The storm, the violation notice, the stress of fighting the HOA, the discovery of Patricia's crimes, the trial, the settlement. It had been exhausting and infuriating and scary. But it had also shown me something important about community. When people come together to fight injustice, they can win. It is not easy and it is not quick, but it is possible. That generator was still sitting beside my house, ready to protect my family the next time the power went out. And now, thanks to the new covenants, every other family in Meadowbrook Heights could do the same without fear. That was worth fighting for. Sarah came out on the porch and called that dinner was ready. Kenneth waved goodbye and headed back to his house. I took one last look around the neighborhood, at the neat lawns and the kids playing basketball in driveways, and the evening light reflecting off windows. This was home. Not perfect, but home. As I walked inside, I realized that the whole ordeal had taught me something valuable about standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult. Especially when it is difficult. Patricia had counted on people being too afraid or too busy to challenge her. She had been wrong. And now, because 17 families had refused to back down, the entire community was better off. The following week, Jim Henderson invited everyone who had been involved in fighting the generator fines to a barbecue at his house. It was a celebration and a thank you. His 86-year-old mother was there, looking healthy and happy. Linda Martinez brought her sister Alina, who was now something of a neighborhood hero. George Patterson held court in a lawn chair, telling stories about previous HOA dramas. Even the families who had not been directly fined but had supported us showed up. As I stood there with Sarah, watching our neighbors laugh and talk and enjoy each other's company, I felt grateful. Grateful that we had fought back. Grateful for the people who had stood with us. Grateful that justice, however slowly, had prevailed. Someone asked me to tell the story of the hearing where Alina had confronted Patricia. I obliged, and everyone listened with satisfaction, knowing how the story ended. When I finished, George raised his glass. To Marcus and everyone else who refused to be intimidated, you saved this neighborhood. To community, Jim added. To community, we all echoed. Later that night, as Sarah and I drove home, she squeezed my hand. I am proud of you, she said. I know this was hard and stressful, but you did the right thing. We did the right thing, I corrected, all of us together. Still, a lot of people would have just paid the fine and moved on. You made sure it meant something. I thought about that. She was right. It would have been easier to pay the $1,500 and forget about it. But easier is not always better. Sometimes you have to fight, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. Over the following months, I heard from several other HOAs in the area that had been inspired by our story. They started asking questions about their own boards, requesting financial audits, demanding transparency. Our local newspaper ran a feature story about HOA reform, using Meadowbrook Heights as an example of how residents could take back control of their communities. Alina Delgado's law practice expanded significantly. She became known as the attorney who would stand up to abusive HOAs, and homeowners from across Pennsylvania started seeking her help. She told me once that our case had been a turning point in her career, showing her that she could make a real difference in people's lives. Kenneth Morrison proved to be an excellent HOA president. Under his leadership, the neighborhood became more cohesive and functional. He organized community events, improved communication, and made sure that every resident felt heard. The contrast with Patricia's dictatorial style could not have been more stark. In November, nearly 9 months after the storm that had started everything, another winter weather warning was issued for our area. This time it was just a bad nor'easter, not the catastrophic ice storm we had experienced before. But I went ahead and prepped the generator anyway, checking the fuel and making sure everything was in working order. As I worked, Jim Henderson came over. "Getting ready?" he asked. "Always." "You?" "Same. Although at least this time we do not have to worry about Patricia sending us violation notices." We both laughed. It felt good to joke about it now, though the experience had left scars. I doubted any of us would ever fully trust an HOA board again, but that was probably healthy. Vigilance was important. The storm hit that night, and while we did not lose power, several streets over did. I saw the lights go out around 8 in the evening and heard generators kick on all across the neighborhood. It was almost funny. Patricia had tried to find 17 families for running generators, and now there must have been 40 generators humming away. Her legacy was that everyone in Meadowbrook Heights had learned the value of being prepared and the danger of giving one person too much power. By December, Patricia's house had been sold. Her husband had moved out of state, presumably to escape the shame and start over somewhere people did not know their story. A young couple with 2 kids bought the place. I introduced myself when they moved in and welcomed them to the neighborhood. They seemed nice, normal people who just wanted a safe place to raise their family. I did not tell them about Patricia. They would hear the story eventually, but it did not need to be the first thing they learned about their new home. Christmas came, and the new HOA board organized a neighborhood light display contest. It was voluntary and fun, with no penalties for not participating. Sarah and I put up lights, not to win, but because it felt good to celebrate. We had survived a difficult year, and we were stronger for it. On New Year's Eve, as we watched the ball drop on television, I reflected on everything that had happened. A year ago, I had been worried about my wife's health and the reliability of our power grid. Now those concerns remained, but I had learned that I could face challenges and overcome them. That when institutions failed, people could still stand up and demand better. That justice, though imperfect and slow, could still prevail. The generator sat outside, quiet but ready. It was more than just a machine now. It was a symbol of our right to protect our families, our willingness to fight for what mattered, and our refusal to be bullied by petty tyrants hiding behind clipboard and covenants. In January, I received a letter from the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. They were conducting a statewide review of HOA practices and wanted to interview me about our experience with Patricia Hollingsworth. They were particularly interested in how HOA boards could abuse their authority and what protections homeowners needed. I agreed to speak with them, hoping that something good could come from our ordeal. The interview took place in February, exactly 1 year after I had received that initial violation notice. I sat in a conference room with 2 assistant attorneys general and walked them through everything: the storm, the generator, the fraudulent fine, the retaliation, the discovery of embezzlement, and the eventual resolution. They took detailed notes and asked thoughtful questions. "Cases like yours are more common than people realize," one of the attorneys told me. "HOA boards operate with very little oversight, and when someone like Patricia Hollingsworth takes control, homeowners often feel powerless. Your case is important because it shows that residents can fight back successfully." "What happens now?" I asked. "We are drafting legislation to increase transparency requirements for HOAs and make it easier for homeowners to challenge improper fines. We are also looking at criminal penalties for board members who engage in embezzlement or fraud. Your case will be cited as part of the justification for these reforms." I left that meeting feeling hopeful. If our experience could lead to changes that protected other homeowners, then all the stress and conflict had been worthwhile. Patricia had hurt a lot of people, but she had also inadvertently sparked a movement toward accountability and reform. By spring, Sarah's health had improved significantly. The stress of the HOA battle had taken a toll on both of us, but with Patricia gone and the new board in place, we could finally relax and enjoy our home. We planted a garden in the backyard and spent weekends working in the yard. The generator sat quietly beside the house, a guardian we hoped never to need but were grateful to have. In April, the Pennsylvania legislature passed the Homeowners Association Accountability Act, which included many of the reforms that had been discussed after our case. The law required annual independent audits of HOA finances, established a state ombudsman to handle homeowner complaints, and created criminal penalties for board members who misused funds or retaliated against residents. Governor Shapiro signed it into law at a ceremony in Harrisburg, and several of us from Meadowbrook Heights were invited to attend. Standing in the Capitol building, watching the governor sign legislation that had grown out of our fight, I felt a sense of completion. We had not just solved our own problem. We had helped fix a systemic issue that affected thousands of Pennsylvania homeowners. The local news covered the bill signing, and I was interviewed along with Jim Henderson and Alina Delgado. The reporter asked what I wanted other homeowners to take away from our story. "Do not be afraid to stand up for your rights," I said. "When someone in authority abuses their power, it is easy to feel helpless, but you are not helpless. Document everything, find allies, hire good counsel if you can, and do not back down. Justice might take time, but it is worth fighting for." That interview aired on the evening news, and my phone buzzed with texts from friends and family who had seen it. Sarah told me she was proud of me. My mother called from Florida to say that she had always known I would do something important. Even my boss at work sent an email congratulating me on making a difference. But the moment that meant the most came a few days later, when a young couple from a different HOA in Montgomery County reached out to me through Facebook. They were facing their own battle with an abusive board president and wanted advice. I spent an hour on the phone with them, sharing everything I had learned and connecting them with Alina Delgado. A month later, they successfully challenged their board and got the president removed. It felt good to know that our experience could help others. As summer arrived and the weather turned warm, Meadowbrook Heights settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new board continued to function well. Property values were stable. People were happy. The neighborhood felt like a community again rather than a dictatorship. I occasionally thought about Patricia Hollingsworth, serving her sentence in state prison. I wondered if she understood what she had done wrong, or if she still believed she had been justified in her actions. I hoped prison was giving her time to reflect and change. But mostly, I just did not think about her at all. She had taken up enough of my time and energy. Now it was time to focus on better things. In August, Kenneth Morrison announced that he would not seek re-election as HOA president. He had done what he set out to do, reforming the board and restoring trust. Now he wanted to step back and let someone else lead. Jim Henderson ran for the position and won. Linda Martinez became vice president. The transition was smooth and democratic, exactly how it should be. At Jim's first board meeting as president, he proposed creating an emergency preparedness committee to help residents plan for future power outages and weather events. The board approved it unanimously, and I volunteered to serve on the committee. We developed guidelines for generator use, created a neighborhood communication tree for emergencies, and organized a bulk purchase program for backup power equipment. It was practical, helpful work that made everyone safer. By the time September rolled around, 18 months had passed since that winter storm had kicked off this entire saga. Sarah and I celebrated our anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. As we sat on our back porch, watching the sunset and listening to the crickets, I realized that we had come full circle. The generator that had caused so much trouble was now recognized as a valuable safety tool. The HOA that had threatened us was now a functional, transparent organization. The neighborhood that had been divided was now united. "You regret buying this house?" Sarah asked me suddenly. I thought about the question. We had gone through hell because of Patricia and the HOA, but we had also found strength we did not know we had. We had made real friends. We had contributed to meaningful change. "No," I said. "I do not regret it at all. This is home." She smiled and took my hand. "Good, because I do not want to move." "Me neither." We sat there in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear kids playing and neighbors talking. Normal sounds of a normal neighborhood. It had taken a fight to get here, but it had been worth it. The generator hummed quietly on the side of the house, ready if needed but silent for now. It had become more than just a backup power source. It was a reminder that standing up for what was right mattered, that communities could heal and grow, and that even in the face of injustice and abuse, ordinary people could make a difference. As I looked around our neighborhood, at the houses with their lights glowing warmly and the trees swaying in the evening breeze, I felt at peace. We had weathered the storm in more ways than one, and we had come out stronger on the other side.